17. The responsibility of judges and rulers. A basic premise of biblical law appears in a law of central importance. According to Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 1 to 9, it is the responsibility of judges and rulers to right every wrong, whether the culprit is located or not. If one be found slain in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee to possess it, lying in the field, and it be not known who hath slain him, then thy elders and thy judges shall come forth, and they shall measure unto the cities which are round about him that is slain. And it shall be, that the city which is next unto the slain man, even the elders of that city shall take an heifer, which hath not been wrought with, and which hath not drawn the yoke. And the elders of that city shall bring down the heifer unto a rough valley, which is neither eared nor sown, and shall strike off the heifer's neck there in the valley. And the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come near, for them the Lord thy God hath chosen to minister unto him, and to bless in the name of the Lord. And by their word shall every controversy and every stroke be tried. And all the elders of that city, that are next unto the slain man, shall wash their hands over the heifer that is beheaded in the valley, and they shall answer and say, Our hands have not shed this blood, neither have our eyes seen it. Be merciful, O Lord, unto thy people of Israel, whom thou hast redeemed, and lay not innocent blood unto thy people Israel's charge. And the blood shall be forgiven them. So shalt thou put away the guilt of innocent blood from among you, when thou shalt do that which is right in the sight of the Lord. The observations of some of the commentators are of interest with respect to details of this law. The slaying of the animal was not an expiatory sacrifice, and consequently there was no slaughtering and sprinkling of the blood, but as the mode of death, that is to say, breaking the neck, see Exodus chapter 13, verse 13, clearly shows, it was a symbolical infliction of the punishment that should have been borne by the murderer upon the animal which was substituted for him. If the murderer were discovered afterwards, of course the punishment of death which had been inflicted vicariously upon the animal, simply because the criminal himself could not be found, would still fall upon him. According to Manley, the 6th Commandment taught that human life is sacred, and now Moses rules that murder must be atoned for. Rashi comments, A yearling heifer which had borne no fruit shall come and be beheaded in a place which yielded no fruit, to atone for the murder of the man whom they did not suffer to bear fruit. The ideas of atonement and cleansing are combined, and both point to Calvary. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 13. In analyzing the implications of this law, certain things appear and are of particular importance. First, the entire community has a responsibility to right the wrongs committed within its jurisdiction. This is an aspect of the police power of the citizenry. As Wright noted, crime is not merely a private matter between individuals. The whole community bears the responsibility as well as the unknown murderer. It is necessary, therefore, that the community shall acknowledge this fact and act to secure divine forgiveness. Second, if the community cannot locate the guilty party, then it must take steps to right the wrong all the same, or else it becomes guilty along with its courts and rulers. The point of the ceremony is to put away the blood of innocent guilt. Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 9. In this sense only is there a collective guilt. However, those who fail to work to institute God's requirement of restitution are individually guilty, even though they number millions, whereas those who uphold the principle of restitution are absolved from the individual guilt. The collective guilt is thus essentially individual. There is, however, a collective judgment on the nation or community from the hand of God. Third, this is case law, and it must be understood in terms of its basic principle, restitution. This law clearly affirms that crime must be atoned for and the wrong righted. If God must be reckoned with, then man also must be reckoned with. The principle of restitution is a total one and requires restoration in every area. The symbolic death of the murderer means that the community believes that the restoration of true order is mandatory. This brings us to the principle of restitution for murder. We have previously studied restitution from a number of perspectives. Now, a further implication needs to be drawn. One aspect of the law of restitution for murder is capital punishment. Another aspect is monetary compensation, which appears in Exodus chapter 21, verses 30 to 32. The personal property of the murderer is liable to seizure, but not that of his wife, for sale to compensate the relatives of the deceased. The history of biblical law in its use in history makes it clear that a crime could have a double penalty because of its implications. Thus, in medieval courts, failure to pay a contracted debt meant not only the requirement to repay, but punishment for perjury by the court, since the contract to pay, being broken, represented false witness. Where society apprehends a criminal, it is a duty before God to require restitution. Where it fails to apprehend the criminal, the duty to make restitution still remains. The state must, in all such cases, make restitution out of special funds for that purpose, either tax or fine funds accumulated for such a cause. Clearly, it is God's purpose that every wrong be righted. Where the criminal cannot be apprehended, the state or the community must make atonement and restitution. The meaning of atonement is simply restitution. Atonement implies restitution in a more total sense, in relationship to God and the whole of God's reality. This principle did enter into Western law. Thus, Waller, writing with Britain in view, wrote, "It is remarkable that in our own time, the most effectual remedy against outrages of which the perpetrators cannot be discovered is a fine upon the district in which they occur. The absence of such a law has made many counties of the United States profitable areas of criminality. Murder, theft, and a variety of offences flourish in these areas to the profit of corrupt officials and businessmen, and with no penalty from any law of restitution. Such a law would soon lead to a pragmatic moral outrage. The present alliance of courts, public officials, and businessmen to countenance crime because it is profitable cannot exist where restitution is required in every case. Fourth, the presence of the priests in the courts is to be noted. Josephus recorded the fact that the Levites were regularly assigned to all courts as a part of the implied requirements of the law of Moses. Let there be 7 men to judge in every city, and these such as have been before most zealous in the exercise of virtue and righteousness. Let every judge have 2 officers allotted them out of the tribe of Levi. Let those that are chosen to judge in the several cities be had in great honour, and let none be permitted to revile any others when these are present, nor to carry themselves in an insolent manner to them, it being natural that reverence toward those in high offices among men should procure men's fear and reverence toward God. Let those that judge be permitted to determine according as they think to be right, unless any one can show that they have taken bribes to the perversion of justice, or can allege any other accusation against them, whereby it may appear that they have passed an unjust sentence. For it is not fit that causes should be openly determined out of regard to gain, or to the dignity of the suitors, but that the judges should esteem what is right before all other things. Otherwise God will by that means be despised, and esteemed inferior to those, the dread of whose power has occasioned the unjust sentence. For justice is the power of God. He, therefore, that gratifies those in great dignity, supposes them more potent than God himself. But if these judges be unable to give a just sentence about the causes that come before them, which case is not infrequent in human affairs, let them send the cause undetermined to the holy city, and there let the high priest, the prophet, and the Sanhedrin determine as it shall seem good to them. In the determination and application of the law, these Levites were authoritative. The civil judges dealt with the guilt of the criminal and the hearing of the evidence. The Levites with the specific nature and application of the law. And by their word shall every controversy and every stroke be tried. Literally. And upon their mouth shall be every strife and every stroke. That is, by their judgment, the character of the act shall be determined, and as they decide, so shall the matter stand. Compare chapter 10, verse 8, chapter 17, verse 8. In the present case, the presence of the priests at the transaction gave it sanction as valid. Fifth, we saw with respect to the trial of jealousy that, according to Hosea chapter 4, verse 14, when guilt becomes prevalent, God's specific judgment of guilty wives is replaced with a general judgment. The ceremony of breaking a heifer's neck ended at about the same time as the trial of jealousy, in the 1st century AD. According to the Talmud, our rabbis taught, when murderers multiplied, the ceremony of breaking a heifer's neck was discontinued, because it is only performed in a case of doubt. But when murderers multiplied openly, the ceremony of breaking a heifer's neck was discontinued. In every culture where specific judgment fails, then general judgment follows. Judgment is inescapable wherever there are offences. If the offender is not brought to the courts and required to make restitution, then the civil order must make restitution. The just claims to atonement by God, the great Lord and owner of all men and all the earth, and the just claims of offended men must be met. If they are not met, then God's judgment on the entire social order will ultimately follow. Christ's atonement to God is his act of restitution for his new humanity. By his perfect obedience to God's law and his vicarious death for the elect, Jesus made restitution for his people. Those who are the Lord's race, the new humanity, will make restitution between man and man as their response to God's grace. Men who have no atonement with God through Christ will make no atonement towards men. Churches which are Christian in name only will not preach restitution, neither will they right wrongs. Their answer to their own problems is pragmatic. If lay officers are morally wrong but are important men, the pastor is transferred to avoid conflict. If the pastor is morally guilty or unfit for the ministry, he is transferred all too often and too seldom demitted. Not restitution, but institutional security is usually the goal.